Hi everyone, I'm just going to have a look at liberalism. We're just going to have a quick look at some of the differences between classical liberals and modern liberals. So first of all, I'm going to tackle four themes. And we're going to look at the classical liberal outlook first, and then we'll look at the modern liberal outlook. So first up, we have human nature. So the classical liberal view of human nature is that individuals are rational, we are capable of rationality, and we prefer to pursue an enlightened self-interest. Modern liberals view this slightly differently. They place an emphasis on individuals craving freedom, but they also understand that there are obligations there to those who are less fortunate. So the second theme that we're going to look at is the role of the state. So classical liberals argue that the state should be limited by a government which should be based on representative democracy. They believe in negative rights. Modern liberals turn this on their head, turn this view on its head. So they argue that state intervention can be justified on the grounds of social justice, equality, and that social welfare is necessary. So they believe in an enabling state. So they argue that the power of the state can be used for good, and so long as it is controlled by constitutional rules and it is fully democratic. So there is a belief in positive rights within modern liberalism. So the fourth theme is society. So classical liberals argue that society is naturally competitive, being made up as it is by free individuals who are each pursuing their own interests, which quite often will overlap. So this vision of society does not recognise collective aims such as the common good. Modern liberals on society argue that modern society should embrace a degree of social welfare as well as social justice. So individualism should be tempered with social action and a recognition of what a common good is. You know, those at the top should look after those at the bottom to an extent. And the fourth theme and the final theme that I'm going to look at now is the economy. So classical liberals argue that the economy should be based on free markets, free trade, and a lack of state intervention, laissez-faire in other words. Modern liberals argue that the injustices which have been thrown up by capitalism should be reduced, and it is one of the state's responsibilities, one of the state's roles to try to reduce these inequalities through welfare, through inequality of opportunity, and through a degree of redistribution as well, through state redistribution. So those are some of the differences on the core themes. So what we're going to move on to is just going to have a quick look at whether or not what the similarities and differences between classical and modern liberalism actually are. So we're going to look at whether or not the classical liberalism and modern liberalism are radically different. So the argument that they are radically different. First up, the different strands of liberalism interpret freedom, they interpret liberty in dramatically different ways. So the classical liberal argument of negative freedoms is the complete opposite of the argument of positive freedoms. Therefore, you have to say they are radically different. Secondly, classical liberals argue for a minimal state. Modern liberals argue for an enabling state. So two huge differences between classical and modern liberals emerge there. Thirdly, classical liberals view taxation as an infringement of basic rights. It's a negative freedom. Some, if you take it to its libertarian or neoliberal extremes, would argue that it's a form of theft. Modern liberals view taxation as essential. It's vital. It plays a part in these positive freedoms and the positive role that the state can play in many people's lives in creating equality and creating freedom for people. Fourthly, classical liberals favour a laissez-faire approach to the economy. Modern liberals don't. Modern liberals in recent years have embraced Keynesian economics, which is the exact opposite of, let's say, of a laissez-faire approach to the economy, particularly in the aftermath of a recession. You can look at post-World War II. You can maybe look at what a classical and modern liberals' approach would be to the COVID-19 crisis we're in the midst of at the moment. And finally, classical liberals prefer limited forms of democracy, or traditionally did, so that only elite groups can participate, as seen through the Electoral College in the US Constitution. Modern liberals embrace full representative democracy. So those are the differences. Some are more relevant today than others. So those are the differences looked at. We're going to look at how the similarities now, and how classical and modern liberalism aren't necessarily so different. So firstly, both modern and classical liberalism have a positive view of human nature and also human potential. We are rational. We will think of others, is what they both believe in. The second reason, both strands agree on the principle of government by consent, and the concept of a limited government, although their definition of what constitutes limited government does itself differ. Thirdly, modern and classical liberals believe in rationalism. They believe in the harm principle. They believe in the toleration of minority groups and minority opinions as well. Fourthly, individualism is the main goal, some would argue, for both classical and modern liberalism. They have different ways that they want to achieve this, which centres on positive rights and negative rights, but individualism is a key goal of both strands of liberalism. And finally, both strands of liberalism are enthusiastic supporters of capitalism, the free market, and they both oppose nationalism. So on some really big issues, there are still similarities between classical liberals and modern liberals. So I hope that was useful. Ask me any questions if you want to.